Right.
That's fabulous.
It's time to get started.
All right.
So let's, I have a lot to cover tonight. You probably noticed you have a lot of pages. So we're going to talk really fast, so you're all going to have to get your ears in high gear and get them all ready to go so you can understand everything I say. And we'll try to get this covered tonight. All right. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, tonight, as we gather together again to read your word, to study what you have for us, Lord, I pray you will just anoint your word as it goes out. Anoint my lips to say those things you'd have me to say, and anoint our hearts to receive that kernel, that peace that will grow in our hearts and spring forth into good fruit. And I thank you for tonight, and I just pray your blessings on this place in Jesus' name. Amen. Alrighty.
You married her. Or she
Anyway.
didn't. You married her. You married her.
All right, we're starting the 4th chapter in Nehemiah tonight. And, you know, up till this point, that Nehemiah had the walls built. Last week, you know, we went through the power of how the walls were built and kind of the shape. I don't have a PowerPoint. There's nothing really to put on it tonight. So tonight, they have built the walls up to a certain point, and now we're going to see the opposition that comes when you try to do anything for God. You're always going to have opposition. If you don't have opposition, then it's probably a pretty good indication you may need to go back and see if you're really doing something for God. Because that's just the way it always works. Opposition comes when you're doing the will of God. So let's start with Nehemiah chapter 4. But it so happened, when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, that he was furious and very indignant and mocked the Jews. And he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned?" Now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, "Whatever they build, if even a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall." Yeah. This is kind of, I kind of get a chuckle when I read this, because it's kind of like kids on the playground. You know, they're over here, "Well, you just can't, it's not going to do anything, and even if I blow on it, it's going to fall down." You know, that's kind of what you see here with these guys. But remember, these were governors. These were leaders of their areas. And when Sanballat, who was the Samaritan, and of course he was over the area of Samaria, the Jews were rebuilding. Now, he knew they were rebuilding, but this really isn't a matter of hearing that they were doing something. It's realizing that they were actually getting it done. They were actually getting the wall done. It's one thing to stand around and say, "Oh, we're going to rebuild the wall." And nobody gets excited. "Oh, we're going to rebuild the wall." "Oh, we're going to reach our city." And nobody gets excited. But when you start reaching your city, then they get excited. Oh, now we have opposition. And so that's what we had here. Now the Samaritans, of course, were the sworn enemy of the Jews. And so because they were the sworn enemies, basically Samaria was a bunch of, we call them half-breeds. They had intermixed. They were Jews who had intermarried with all of the nations around them. They basically took Judaism as their base religion, but then they mixed it with all kinds of idols and heathen worship, so that they had, for instance, they had their own temple. In fact, they had two temples, because there was one in Jerusalem that was the Jewish temple. The Samaritans had two, on two different positions, and they had golden calves in them. Oh, isn't that sound familiar?
Yeah.
And they worshipped different kinds of gods, but they kept all the Jewish feasts, and they kept all the Jewish rituals. But they changed all of that and had their own brand of religion. Also, they were the sons of Judah, which was the two tribes, and they were constantly at war with each other. It was so bad that in the times of Jesus, you didn't go through Samaria. If you wanted to go from Judah up into northern Israel, above what was considered Samaria, you went over to the coast, you got on a boat, and you went around the sea up to the other side of Samaria and got out of your boat and went that way, or you crossed on the other side of the Sea of Galilee and came around from the top. They would not set foot in Samaria.
Smart people.
That's how bad it was. Now, and this is what makes the parable, or not the parable, but the Jesus going out of his way to go through Samaria and sit at the well and talk to the woman at Samaria. It wasn't so much that he was talking to a woman or that he was resting at a well. It was that he was in Samaria. So this is the background against which we see this Sanballat becoming so furious. So furious. He was just mad. You know, they're rebuilding the walls. And there was also this thought that Judah had finally been driven out of the land. You know, they were captive, they were gone. This was no longer a creditable force that Samaria could go to war with, or, you know, I mean, they were gone. They had won, basically. Oh, we won, they're gone, it's wonderful. And now, look, they're rebuilding. Oh, look, they're rebuilding their capital city, Jerusalem. Does that sound a little familiar on current events? What stirred up a hornet's nest is when President Trump said, we're moving our embassy to Jerusalem and we're recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Yep.
Oh, terrible. Did anything really change? No. They're going to do business in Jerusalem instead of Tel Aviv. Wow, 60 miles, completely different. But it was the idea that now they were the cultural and religious and political center of Judah. All right. He openly mocked the Jews and derided their efforts. And then he talked to his counselors, his cohorts there. This is his brother. His brothers were his cohorts, his allies. And look at who they are. Well, first of all, he says, what are they doing? What are they doing here? What is their ultimate goal? What is their ultimate aim? Why are they rebuilding these walls? What are they up to? Since they're so few in number and short on resources, what do they expect to accomplish? I mean, when you look at this, remember Nehemiah came because of the deplorable condition of the Jews in Jerusalem. They had nothing, and here they are rebuilding their walls. How are they going to do that? How in the world do they ever expect to accomplish anything? They're so few and powerless. And I wonder if that isn't exactly what the devil and all of his cohorts say about the church. How do they expect to ever win Tacoma? How does this church ever expect to do anything in the world? Do they think they're going to make an impact on this community around here? 5,000 houses within a mile radius, and we're sitting here with about 50 people or 60 people in church on Sunday morning. How do we anticipate, how do we expect to make any kind of an impact in this community.
One person at a time.
Hmm?
Time.
Yeah. But we have the answer. And we have the answer in the book of Nehemiah. We've looked at it as just rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, but let's take a look at it and say, how do we win our community? What did Nehemiah do? How did he do it to get the job done that could not possibly have been done? How did he do it? Well, that's what we're going to look at. He says, will they build a fortress? Do they really think they can protect themselves from us? He said, will they offer sacrifices? Will an offer or a sacrifice, dedication on the walls they are trying to build, do they really think they can dedicate these walls to God and anything is going to happen? Remember last week, what was the first thing that happened when they started building the walls? The first section got done. What happened?
They did their sacrifice.
They had a dedication. Remember, that was the sheep gate and the priests, and they dedicated the wall. They sanctified the wall. They set it aside as a separate. That's what sanctification means, is to separate. So they dedicated the wall because it was going to keep the evil forces out of Jerusalem. That's the feeling behind it. And here Sanballat is saying, do they really think they can offer a sacrifice and it's really going to work? Will they complete it in one day? Since it was obvious, these workers are working from sun up to sundown, everybody's involved. Do they really think they can build the walls in one day? In other words, that fast, and the walls actually stay up? You know what happens when you get in a hurry? Everybody cuts corners, and all of a sudden you get the wall up and look at it, it's a beautiful wall, and all of a sudden, boom, down it comes. Now I got to start all over. Well, that's what they're saying. How can they possibly get a wall to working that fast? Can they do it in one day? Will they revive the stones from the heap of rubbish? Since they don't have the resources to go out and get new stones or have them hauled in from a quarry someplace, they have to use the stones that are there. Do they really think they can use these stones, and notice this, that are all burned? We may look at that and say, rocks don't burn. Well, let me give you a little heads up here. If you build a fire pit, I have a fire pit at home, and mine's not big, but I just use rocks. You know, just some rocks. I've got a few in my yard, enough to sink 3 battleships. But I got and so I built it. It's been there, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. But you look at those rocks. They're already crumbling. They're split. They're cracked because the heat causes stones to separate and to break down. And they're saying, they really think they're going to go into this heaps of garbage and pull out these big rocks, these big stones, and they're going to build a wall and it's going to stand up without just crumbling. He's asking some pretty deep questions here. Do we think we can go into a community that's been here a long time, that's seen everything, a community that has basically is godless, that has turned their backs on God? Do we really think we can go in to human beings that are burned, that we look at and say they're just crumbling, they have no foundation? Do we really think we can use them to build a wall? To build anything? We see people come into our church sometimes, and it's so easy to say, you know, we might be better if they didn't come. You know, I mean, these people, they're stones.
Yes.
They're stones that might be crumbling. They're stones that might be overheated. They're stones that may not be worth anything to anybody else.
Yeah.
But when they're put into the work of God, it's amazing what happens. Those stones that Nehemiah used to build the walls of Jerusalem, you can go over there today and look at them.
Still there?
They're still there. And the more they dig around, the more of the wall they find. And the rocks are, we've been down and touched them.
Wow.
They're there. They're huge, but they're there. I mean, if it lasts 2,000 some years, I mean, that's probably a pretty good job of putting them together. All right. Tobiah, who was, of course, one of Sanballat's cohorts, he mocked the rebuilding effort by predicting that even if they rebuild the walls, just the weight of a fox will cause them to crumble. Well, of course, this was a continuation of Sanballat's idea. The foxes were numerous in Jerusalem because foxes gather where there are piles of rubbish. It's kind of like rats. You know, if you have a lot of garbage and you have a lot of stuff around, I don't care what you do, you're going to have rats. I don't know where they come from. I don't know if they rain down out of sky. I don't know where they come from. You can be in the middle of a desert, have a bunch of garbage, and you're going to have rats. I don't know where they come from. But the foxes were that way in Jerusalem, and they would burrow into these heaps. I mean, it was where they were comfortable.
Yeah.
So there were foxes everywhere. So what Sanballat is saying is, look, he got all of these foxes because of the rubbish. They're everywhere, and if they just happen to jump up on the wall, well, how are they going to jump up on the wall? The walls are a lot taller than those little foxes are going to jump up on. So what he was really saying is, they're never going to get the walls tall enough, you know, for foxes not to be able to jump on them. And then when they do, they'll just come down. They'll just crumble. Ridiculing. Right, verse 4. Hear, O God. Hear, O God. Hear, O God. For we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own heads and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity. Do not let their sin be blotted out from before you, for they have provoked you before the builders. Boy, now there is a prayer of mercy. You see these guys? Hey, God, listen to me. You see these guys, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to judge them. I want you to bring the same reproach on them that they're bringing on us. In fact, I want you to bring some country here, capture them, and haul them all off captive to their lands. Let's just get them out of here. And isn't that the way we pray when opposition comes against us? Isn't that basically what we say? God, you see what these people are doing. God, strike them dead. Clean them up. We need a clear path to where we're going, and these people are getting in our way. Just get them out of the way.
I was always taught to bless them first, and then ask God to take care of them.
But is that the way God does things? According to the Apostle Paul, we are to expect that. And it's good for us. Oops.
I haven't 18 months because my neighbor above my head, I don't think it's good for me.
Well, now of course that's not for the gospel's sake, so let's remember that. You can just pray their apartment burns down. No, but you know, we want to have opposition. Yeah, but the Apostle Paul says opposition is good for us. Why? Because it works patience. Whoa.
The P word.
Patience.
Oh. Don't ever pray for
I mean,
that.
let's look at Nehemiah.
This one's for me.
Here's Nehemiah, who is the cupbearer to the king. I mean, to us, we look at that and say servant, you know, highbrow servant. We're going to see in a few minutes how rich and wealthy Nehemiah was. But here he is on the king's business. He's got letters that say he's representing the king of Persia, and he's listening to these scrubby little governors who, if Artaxerxes decided he wanted to come down and capture him, you know, I mean, it would take probably 3 hours. You know, he'd just roll in with his Persian army and overcome them and put them all in and haul them off, and that'd be the end of the story. And Nehemiah, the messenger back to Shushan, to Artaxerxes, and say, you authorized us to do this, and these guys are in our way. What do you think the king of Persia would do? Yeah, he'd take care of the situation, right?
Well, he had armies with him.
Well, he had guards with him, yeah.
Guards.
Yeah. But I mean, he was not authorized to go to war with anybody. He wasn't authorized to do anything except rebuild the walls. These people are. And look at his prayer. I mean, he is not, you know, he's not sparing anything.
Not mincing words.
He said, don't even let their iniquity be covered. In other words, don't give them mercy. Don't cover it up. Don't cover it up. Just go out there and take care of it and blot them out. Just wipe them out.
Evict that person above my head. Evict them.
Whack them.
Yeah.
Why would God even consider that? Number one, because they're bringing their reproach or a reproach on the Jews. They're making false statements. They're bringing a reproach on the Jews. They were the children of Israel. Who was Israel? The child of God. In other words, this is God's
Kids.
God's people.
ancestors, or not ancestors, that's not, the family, I guess, is the best way to put it.
That's a good word here.
And they're ridiculing them. He says, don't show any mercy. By disparaging the work he had ordained, they showed contempt for the builders and for God. You know, we look at this and we say Nehemiah just lost his temper. But really, he had some basis here. Because he was saying, they are showing contempt for you, God. They're showing contempt for you. While it was a display of a personal indignation, it was based on the conviction that the actions of Sanballat were not directed by God, but at the children of Israel, who were the chosen and sanctified children of God. So, what does that mean? That means that it's okay to have indignation as long as it's directed for the right reason and at the right location. Now, I'm not saying I was right in saying, blot these guys out and throw them. But the indignation he had was because of how these men were ridiculing and scoffing and getting in the way of the work of God. And that's what Paul constantly talked about. He says, when you face these problems because of the gospel, because of what you're preaching, because of the work you're doing for God, count it joy. Now that means, I mean, you could read the other side and say, if somebody's pounding on my floor all night long or playing loud music, I don't have to count it as joy. I can walk up, open the door and say, I've told you for the last time. Pow! No, you don't want to do that.
But you know what I've learned about that last week's sermon is that I've done everything I can in my own power trying to stop this. But last week's sermon, last Sunday's sermon, it reminded me it's like I need to let it go and give it to God and just give it to Him and not try to do anything on my own because He can take care of it.
Okay. Nehemiah 4:6. This is a simple one statement. So we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work.
Amen. With all their heart.
So here is all of this going on with Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, all of this bunch. In the midst of all that, Nehemiah's indignation, kill them all, take them all off, do whatever, God, yeah. And then he just kind of comes back and said, we built the wall.
God built it.
We joined it together. We got it to half its height. Because the people had a mind to work. Had a mind to work.
You have to have a mind to work.
Did you all hear that? A mind to work.
They worked with all their heart.
You're going to be hearing more about this in coming months. This was one of the things we talked about at length this week. What does it mean to work, and why do we work? Why do we serve God? Why do we do these things?
Because we love
And
them.
there's a reason for it. And in this case, I think the reason is summed up by Nehemiah. He is the leader. He's the one that was inspiring everyone. He was the one that was leading them on. And we have to go back to the very first chapter when Nehemiah hears what's going on. And what was his concern? For people. For people. He said, the people in Jerusalem are destitute. The people in Jerusalem and in Judea, look at their condition. And when he went to, it was about the people. It wasn't about the walls. It wasn't about the walls. He didn't go to the king and say, oh, king, we got to rebuild these walls because they're, you know, this used to be an elegant city, and it used to be a great city, and we used to have this great temple, and now we got a temple, but there's no walls to defend the temple. That would have been a good argument. But that wasn't his concern. He could care less about the temple as far as defending it. That's God's. He'll have to take care of that. But he was concerned for the people. And because the people had become a reproach to those around. Why did it matter? They were the children of God. And they were now a reproach. You see, it was the condition of the people. And because of that, he instilled that into his people. And we'll see more of that as we go through tonight. He instilled into them the idea that they were a reproach and they needed to get rid of the reproach. How do you get rid of the reproach? You build walls. Defenses. And this may be a bit of a stretch, catch on there with me. But when we reach our community and we bring people the gospel of Jesus Christ that leads them to a position that they accept the Lord, you know what we have done? We have built a wall around them that is a defense against Satan and all of his allies. Principalities, powers, devils, whatever you want to call them. That only happens when they love him and come to a relationship with him. When they had a mind to work. When they understood that what they were doing was not building a beautiful wall so people could say, oh, a beautiful wall. They were rebuilding a wall to protect them from their enemies. You say, that's basic. I mean, who wouldn't figure that one out? Well, Nehemiah, to him it wasn't basic. And as we go through, we'll see more of his feelings on that. In spite of the threats and mockeries of Sanballat and his cohorts, the wall reached a point to where it was half the height. No, so what was half the height? Well, they say that the walls of Jerusalem, the one that they've excavated and been able to figure and measure, were approximately 40 feet, actually 39.7 feet or
Wow.
something high. That was the average. Some were higher, depending on
That's
the
pretty
terrain. So they were somewhere around 20 feet, about half. The building went so fast that a defensible wall was erected quickly because the people had a mind to work.